And the first on our program this morning is my sister in the Lord, Becky Hendricks, whom I got to know. When she appeared here at the convention. Was it 2 years ago? Yeah. And found out she's just only lives about 15 miles away from me, and all of this time I didn't know she was there, and it was so good to meet her. But Becky's got a very interesting testimony that she has titled a scripture, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. You will," oh my goodness, eyes go first, huh? You will rest in me. And I see Becky doing that more and more each day, each year, coming to rest in the Lord and to know him better and better. But we want to hear how did the Lord bring her to this point of maturity and trusting in him from the Watchtower organization. Becky, come and tell us. Get a big hug.
Thank you. Good morning. Ever since Joan asked me to do this, I started reminiscing over my life as a Jehovah's Witness. And one of the memories that kept coming back to me was how when we would meet new people and we'd share with how we came into the truth. I remember once telling a sister about how a long, hard journey it was for me to come into the truth. And she said, "Becky, they'll never print your story in a Watchtower." Well, there was a lot of truth in her statement. The printed stories that you'd read or the ones we'd share with each other had a certain sameness about them. We'd be contacted with a neighbor or a workmate at the door or raised as a Jehovah's Witness. And there was a lot that would be shared about how we studied and all the things we had to give up and do to qualify to be baptized. And then there was a long emphasis on all the works that we did in years of service. Well, how different our stories are that we share here. They're as individual and unique as each of us are as humans, as our God reaches out to us, bringing us into the truth. Our stories glorify all that he's done and not what we have done. Today, I'm really happy to have an opportunity to testify how I learned the truth, and Jehovah has changed my life. As a young child, I was raised in a church and learned the Bible stories and had a respect for the Bible and believed in God and his son Jesus. But I didn't grow into a spiritual or religious person. I only began to take an interest because I had Mormon neighbors who had shared with me, and I read their Book of Mormon, and I thought, well, maybe I ought to read the Bible. And so out of curiosity, I started doing that, and I had many questions. And then along came the Jehovah's Witnesses at my door. And I was a young wife, expecting my third child. I had a baby and a toddler, and my husband was just starting his fourth year in the university. Marriages were breaking up and down our street in married student housing all the time. And I had a lot of anxiety how we'd even get through the last year. When I looked into the Truth Book, what really appealed to me and drew me to want to study with the Jehovah's Witnesses was when they spoke about someone realizing their spiritual need. And I realized I had a need for something greater than myself to get through this last year of his school. So I accepted a study and enjoyed it. I studied with 3 generations of women in one family. And I grew to love them and liked everything I was learning. Some of it was a little hard to take, but I persevered and continued with that for many months. I was getting to the end of the Truth Book just as my husband was getting ready to graduate. and I was looking forward to baptism. I had a lot of confidence that things would get better as I continued to apply what I was teaching. Soon after we settled in a new home, I right away started attending the meetings, and then I started going out in service. I was really pushed very hard to be at all the meetings all the time and always be present when the congregation went in service. That really took over my life. But my husband started to study, and I thought, well, this is what we're going to do, and this is really going to be the key when both of us together are working with the Lord. Our marriage will get over a lot of the difficulties that we had, but it didn't happen that way. Instead, as he studied, it pulled us apart. The brother that studied with him was very suspicious and didn't have a very good opinion of women. And I was really struggling with the way that I was being treated all the time. I didn't understand the rules of how the congregation operated. But we moved again, and I was really hesitant to pick up studying and where I'd left off because I didn't like that busy life. But I started to study hoping that I could understand what had gone wrong and get over my unpleasant experiences and be more willing to be faithful. That study didn't last long because I didn't shape up fast enough. And my struggles held me back. My questions were still not answered. So I didn't have any desire to go to the meetings. And off for many years, I'd start and stop studies, never going out in service again. I still love talking about the Bible and Jehovah with people. And over I prayed that he would create a new heart that wanted to do his will in me. This went on for 15 years. I'd call it my time of living under the influence. I was not really a Jehovah's Witness, not being baptized, but in all the ways that we lived our family without celebrations and birthdays and the decisions that we made, I did it under the beliefs of the things that I'd been taught. And then one day when my children were teens, I started a study, and suddenly our whole family joined in. And I found myself once again very busy getting us all out to the meetings, out in service, and I had no time for any personal study. Our family life began to suffer, and the strain on our marriage increased. We were giving up so much of time, our family traditions, and shared interests into things that drew us together, and we spent it all in meetings and service, and they were not proving to be uniting force in our family. We had our 5th child during this time, and the complications of her birth and early delivery and care preoccupied all of my time. And I had high blood pressure problems that left me unable to see for quite a while, enough to read or study. So I was just kind of winging it along, relying on all the things that I had learned in the beginning back in 1981. I was unaware of the changes and the new light. My husband was pressing forward to be baptized, and he quit his job to qualify for that. There were a lot of important decisions to be made for our family, and I took my concerns and worries and needs to Jehovah, and I believe that he had answered the way to fill them all. We had set a time over the Thanksgiving weekend for the two of us to talk about all we needed to do, how we were going to deal with him choosing a new job, and a date to plan that. And the day before, a letter with an invitation for a job arrived in the mail. And as I read it and the job description, it was everything he wanted. And I read the area, and it was everything I wanted for my teenagers that were becoming young adults and all to move there. But he didn't want to. He had other plans. And we never really were able to have that conversation. The elders soon butted in with an opinion that if there had been a job offer, it was Satan trying to stumble us. that it was really not a good time for our family to move as we were all getting ready to be baptized. This caused a huge rift in our family, and I got really depressed and anxious. Because of this, and we were arguing and fighting all the time. I went to counseling to help me with my depression, and I worked really hard to try and humble myself and follow my husband's lead so that we could mend our marriage in this huge rift, but I was not able to be successful at it. I started having doubts about the truth because of the fruit I saw it producing. I went to an elder telling him how separated I felt from Jehovah, and I had no joy left in my life. And I felt everything that I had to do as a Jehovah's Witness was so burdensome. I just couldn't go on. He didn't have much to say to me that day, but he sent several brothers to visit soon after. And they persuaded me that my problem was Jehovah was holding back because I was not going forward to commit to him. It was my not being baptized was my problem. I was assured that everything would be different and I would receive God's Holy Spirit when I was baptized. I knew that's what I needed. All the study and knowledge and following of rules was not enough for me to be a good wife or mother that I wanted to be. Doing it all by own wasn't working. And so I set into motion all the things I needed to do to qualify. And in a few weeks, I was stepping into that baptismal pool. Jehovah was going to strengthen me. Everything was going to be all right as soon as I demonstrated my public love for him. And just as I was about to go under, the brother, the one who a few weeks before had sat in my living room and had assured me that I would receive Jehovah's Spirit, said, I baptize you in the name of the Father and the Son and God's Spirit-directed organization. The light went on, and I went down under the water, screaming out in my mind, no, no, Jehovah, forgive me. I don't remember much the weeks after that. I kind of walked around the living dead in shock. I gave birth to our sixth child prematurely, right, a few weeks after that. And I don't remember much of anything. We had to move at that time into a different congregation since we were getting a little bit bigger house. And I do remember when I started back to the meetings that right away there was a new man in the congregation there. And he pursued me relentlessly, always trying to touch me inappropriately. I have long suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder from an incident in my teen years. And this, between the baptism and the person who was always touching me, I had a bad flare-up. I'd always been able to just be a little bit quirky and have some weird compulsions and habits, but I came completely unwell mentally and lived in a state of fear and terror all the time. I raged and had a huge amount of anger, and unfortunately my husband was the object of that. And so all this that I was trying to do to improve our marriage just made it worse and worse. I don't know how he put up with me. I went back to more counseling and more help from my doctor in order to get me through this. And I was mostly troubled by the way that the elders had a hands-off, uninterested attitude about what was going on. They showed no concern for me and what I was going through, although they knew why it was more distressing for me than a lot of women. And that really troubled me. Then, sitting through the meetings, I found that I was hearing things that I hadn't heard before. And I was restless, and I would often have to grip my chair to keep from jumping up and running out of the Kingdom Hall. And I constantly clenched my teeth to keep from yelling out, "No, you're wrong. That's not what the Bible says." I really didn't want to go to those meetings, but I didn't know how to get out of them. My husband and children were all baptized, and I just watched helplessly as everything that I loved seemed to be slipping away. Our family grew more distant, and everyone was self-absorbed in their own life, and I really felt like I was a fear of losing them all. My oldest son had some trouble and was disfellowshipped. And in hearing the rumors that were spread by telephone by an elder labeling him apostate and talking with him afterwards about what really had been said at his hearing, I grew very fearful that the thoughts that I was having and the things I was thinking would be known, because disfellowshipping was one thing, being labeled an apostate was another. Also, during this time, I started being harassed and stalked by an unknown person. I would get phone calls. They would call, and there'd be nobody there. Every 5 minutes, sometime like clockwork, the phone would ring, and sometimes it would go on for hours. Well, I had teenagers and young adults out in the community in service as pioneers and working, and I needed to answer the phone in case they needed me. And we also had a home business, so I had to answer for that, and I couldn't get the number changed. These calls would mostly come when I was alone with the babies, trying to get them fed or down for a nap. It was getting more and more difficult not knowing who it was that was stalking me and why, as I was trying to put that whole thing together. And then I had needed surgery. I'd been clenching my teeth so much, my teeth were about to fall out, and I had to have my gums worked on. And I missed meetings for 2 weeks recovering from that. What a relief I felt not to have to go. I extended it. My recuperation is still in process. I would get everybody ready and fed and the clothes pressed and send them all off to the meetings so I could just have some quiet time to myself to think. At first, I was conflicted over my family's indifference to me attending the meetings and my relief that as long as they were, I could stay home. I spent my time alone going over all the things that troubled me, that I'd heard, and I recalled a lot of things that kept preying on my mind. One of the things was a story I'd been told that there had been apostates at Bethel at one time who had tried to take over. And I began to wonder if the wrong side had won control. Also, I would hear stories about whole kingdom halls having turned apostate and left the truth. And I couldn't understand or figure out, was it our hall that had become apostate? Or was there this other hall somewhere that I would want to find? I was still really confused. I just knew that the truth that I had studied in 1981 was not the truth that was going on now. I go to my Bible and see the contradictions of what I was taught and what was happening and the views that were being expressed. And a few times I would go to elders with problems, although I'd be very careful and guarded about a lot of things. I kept coming away more assured something was definitely wrong. Their answers were showed a lack of common sense, reasoning, or care for the brothers and sisters, or downright unbiblical advice. Each time I spoke to someone, my stress mounted, and I returned to my old smoking habit. I would pace and rage and smoke my time away because I could not see what was happening and understand it all. I loved Jehovah, and I believed the Bible, but I couldn't do anything that they were asking. It was just causing more and more problems, and worried so much as I saw my kids neglecting their educations and their work and future. Our marriage continued with many conflicts, and I was really troubled at my inability to forgive my husband for not having taken that job and let go of anger. No matter how much I tried and prayed, I couldn't do it, and I did not like the person I was becoming. At the advice of my doctor, I went back to school, part of it to take my mind off my troubles, and part to get some skills to support myself. I was not hopeful of my future. Eventually, my smoking and sin was exposed, and I went to my hearing, and I accepted my disfellowshipping quietly and kept my mouth shut about anything else because I was afraid of being an apostate. My husband sat in on my disfellowshipping hearing, and I think that was when his eyes were first opened a little bit. And within a year, he had us moved from New Mexico up here to Pennsylvania. I went to work building a life for myself and a support system. Although I never opposed my husband or children attending meetings or service, I stopped assuming and saying, oh, it's meeting night. Let's have dinner early. Let's get the girls bathed. So I didn't prepare anyone unless I got a phone call asking me to, and soon no one was going to meetings. That seemed to remove a burden of at least busyness, but I was still weighed down. During this time, and for the next several years, I would always think, I need to get my Bible out, and I need to study and sort this all out. I need Jehovah. But I had a steady stream now of adult children leaving the truth and returning home and needing encouragement to start new lives. I wished I had more to offer them. We mostly just ignored discussing the subject of religion. When it was brought up, the wall would go up. And then there was always sickness and surgeries and accidents and marriages and births going on. And although I saw the time passing, I was overwhelmed at the thought of how much study I would need to learn the truth. Then, one day I found out one of my older daughters had returned to a meeting. And I knew I needed to put a stop to her seeking advice there. It was not going to be a good place for her. And I sat down at the computer and I Googled Jehovah's Witness. Wow. That was a shock. I don't know why I'd never done it before. I Googled things all the time. I homeschool our children and I study and research. But that was the momentum I needed to finally do that. My husband left in a few days on a bear hunting trip, and I had a whole week at home, unobserved, to read all I wanted. I think I read it all that week. I read about the history, and I read about all the lies attached to everything and the cover-ups. And I really got thinking, I can't believe anything they told me because they've lied about so much. I need to really question it all. I remember reading that I had been a member of a cult and being so humiliated. What I really wanted to do was just up and pack our family and move somewhere where no one ever knew that I had ever been a Jehovah's Witness. I was so embarrassed about that. But I soon got over it because I read about the hurt that had happened in the families that were split up and the lives lost. And I was thinking, we're getting off pretty easy here in our family. And I need to know more, and I need to talk about this. I realized I needed a Bible, and I needed some more information to get to my daughter. I was still afraid to tell my family about what I was learning for fear it would incite some opposition. I kept everything that I read hidden in folders and folders and folders on the favorites of the things that I'd studied. And I thought, I guess I'm going to have to do it. And I was out shopping one day, and I went in a bookstore and bought a Bible. I remember I still was looking over my shoulder. Although I lived 2,000 miles away from the congregation I had been in, I was looking over my shoulder, uncomfortable over being seen buying a Bible. And then suddenly, when I stepped outside, something happened. It seemed like the sun came out. And I looked down at the mall and started walking, and I looked at all these people. And I was seeing them through my eyes, but it wasn't coming through my mind. I was seeing them the way God looked at them. And I was seeing a lot of love. And then I began to realize he didn't just love everybody, he loved me too, just the way we were. And I realized how judgmental I still was, although I thought I'd left that behind. And I was ashamed. But then I started feeling the love. And my heart came unbound, like it had had a cage on it, and beating with the love for everybody. I was just amazed. And when I went home, suddenly I recalled this convention that there was somewhere near us. And I looked it up and found the date and saw it was just a little over a week away. And I told my husband, and I don't think I set him up or warned him for this. I just said, I want to go to a convention of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. He was really shocked. I was shocked that I had just come out that boldly and told him. But I realized it was the love of God that was driving out the fear inside of me. And so I came. One of the things about the Bible that I bought that day was, I had no idea which type to buy, but this one was written on plain paper. And I thought, I'll have lots of room to write notes. It'll be easier to write on. And the columns went full page, and I thought, oh, how easy to underline and mark things to find for me with all the research that I was going to have to do to find the truth. Well, I came here cautious, but no longer fearful. And I enjoyed talking to the people I met. I was thrilled with the music, like my daughter said yesterday, that we were singing to God, not about ourselves. And what a difference it was. I saw that the haters were not here, that everyone loved Jehovah's people and had a passion for them. And Saturday at lunchtime, I had been looking at my brochure, and I was sitting next to Mim, and I asked her a question. I said, what do I have to do to take communion? And she looked at me and answered back, pray to Jesus, Becky. And she smiled at me. Well, that was a real act of faith on her part, that the Lord was just going to take care of everything. And it proved to be true. It was nearly 12 hours later till I was home that night and alone and able to think about what she'd said. I was standing beside my bed ready for sleep, contemplating. Pray to Jesus. Whoa. But I reasoned that I'd gotten baptized as a Jehovah's Witness, and I was forgiven for that mistake. That if I was still making a mistake, I'd figure it out a lot quicker this time. I was a little more aware, and I thought Jehovah would forgive me again, because what I really wanted to do was pursue him until I found him. So I got down on my knees to pray to Jesus. I hadn't prayed in years, and I was suffering from serious information overload. My mind was just whirling. I didn't even know where to begin. So I decided, Jesus, please help me pray and sort out what I need to say from my heart. I'm a bit of a Star Trek fan. You know how in those episodes when there'd be this really distraught, upset person, and Spock would come in and he'd lay his hands on their head, and they'd struggle, and he'd bring peace to them and order, and they'd find out what they needed to save that person or the planet or whatever the problem was that episode. It was a lot like that. I have felt Jesus' loving arms wrap me. And I grew peaceful. And as I prayed, it was the most orderly, beautiful prayer that I'd ever had. And I was able to get out everything. It was several hours later, as I finished, I asked my question, can I take communion? And I got myself ready for bed, laid down, and as soon as I could quiet on my pillow, I had an answer. He put a thought in my mind that it was still my choice, but I knew what he wanted me to do. When the realization hit me that it had been answered in that way, I leapt up on my knees and I raised my arms up, shouting and declaring my love for my God. That produced a little shock in me too, because I just called Jesus my God. But I felt good about it. During the next few weeks, I did take communion the next morning, but during the next few weeks, I started talking to my family members, and we took things slow and opened the conversation that we had never had for years. I started attending church and continued to pray and trust in Jesus to teach me. Our family found a new joy in celebrating Thanksgiving that year because we had so much to be grateful for. And I wanted my family to know Jehovah as I did. And so we talked a great deal about him through Advent and Christmas. And I tried to help them understand the reason for the season. And then New Year's rolled around. And I was led by a series of events to read the book, What's So Amazing About Grace? And I encountered something that I had wanted for 27 years. There'd always been a lot of misunderstandings between grace and undeserved kindness. That little phrase is kind of thought-stopping to me. It was done and that was it. But grace was so much more I was learning about. I was about halfway through the book, and we were in church having some silent prayer before the congregation prayed together. And I was thinking about my week coming up, because our family still had difficulties and our marriage still had strains on it. And I prayed, Lord, give me some grace, please. And I was going to elaborate on what for, but before I could, I was given a vision in my mind's eye. And I saw a portal open up in the ceiling above our church, and a giant waterfall of sparkling rainbow come pouring down on me. Well, that scared me. I didn't know why he was doing something like that. Boy, what was he preparing me for? It must be something awful. But it wasn't. It was just his grace and Holy Spirit being poured out on me. And through that week, everything went as it usually did in our family, but I didn't go the same. I was patient, and I was more loving, and it was a very peaceful week. And I was looking at a poster I had on the wall of the fruit of the Spirit, and as I read down through all of those, I realized every single one of those had been increased in me. And it was all through a gift. Not through working at it or picking one and applying myself to it for a week. It was through no effort on my part at all. My whole view towards the Lord really, really changed. And for a while, I almost wanted to die and go to heaven to be with him. I was ready to leave this life right then. But I got over that in a little bit. And I've continued my fellowship with the Christian church and was baptized that next summer. Since then, I've learned a lot of new things and been challenged in my studies now that I've finally gotten around to them. The Bible that I bought to mark in doesn't have a mark in it because the Lord has taught me everything that I've needed to know. The relationship that I've been able to have with him is what is important. All that knowledge and verse memorization wasn't the way to find the Lord. I have a lot of difficulty still. I have to work on my prayer life because I've been so accustomed to doing everything on my own. My first thought is not to pray and give my troubles to the Lord, but I'm learning. And each time I do, he answers, and things just keep getting better. Our marriage has been strengthened. We don't have fights. We don't have arguments. I've been able to forgive and show mercy for our differences. And our children, the love and the joy that's come back into our home has been wonderful. My next big battle was I still have one of my children is Jehovah's Witness. And I still had hesitancy about being public about my life. But the Lord helped me the next year to overcome that. And so I'm here. And I've learned to leave it in his hands because I know the way he changed me and reached out and opened my heart and has taught me he can do the same for our son and his wife and their children. And I just need to trust in that. So I just like to conclude that I really do find that I felt the full burden of trying to be a Jehovah's Witness, of living by their rules, because it was always on my own. And that now with the Holy Spirit in my life and Jesus to go to in prayer, the burden is lifted. Matter of fact, I don't feel anything at all unless I'm not going to pray in the Lord. And that's my signal to do that. That's all I got to say. And thank you.